Right. Hi, Amy. Good
Hi,
afternoon.
Nicola. How are you? Good
I'm
afternoon to
great.
you.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, Amy Hill is a fellow nutritionalist of mine. I work with her quite a lot. She's brilliant. She doesn't know something about gut health. I don't know who does. So, yeah, so I just put lots of pressure on you, and you're going to do an amazing job at explaining gut microbiome to everybody. I might as well get started. We've got loads to get on with.
Yeah.
So there's lots and lots of hype about probiotics. And should you be taking them in food form, in supplement form? Would you say do both? What's your opinion on this?
So I would often, we need to replenish and reseed the good microbes in the gut, and we can do that by consuming probiotics, either, by adding in fermented foods. So things like kimchi, sauerkraut, live yogurt, also things like miso and kombucha. So that is one way. And with fermented foods, obviously the good bacteria have actually started to grow and digest the carbohydrates and fibers, so it makes them more digestible as well, and they're really tasty. And obviously if you are fermenting, that is one way of getting these good microbes back into the microbiome. But the issue is down to the stomach acid, because our stomach acid has to be very acidic. It's designed to prevent live bacteria from being able to actually enter our digestive tract. And if you really think about it, I mean, if you're eating something that was contaminated with harmful bacteria, say food that's just started to go off, for example, this would make sense, because the stomach should be acidic to prevent us from getting food poisoning and infections. So that's really good, but it does make it quite difficult to get live bacteria into the digestive tract alive. So you'd have to eat quite large amounts of fermented foods and quite regularly. I mean, obviously, when you're eating foods, it does buffer the pH of the stomach. But that's why we recommend taking probiotics with meals. However, if you do take a supplement, it's much quicker, it's much easier, more convenient. It might work around your daily routine a lot easier. You don't have to ferment your foods. Obviously, you can take them abroad on holiday. You can put them in your handbag. And a good quality probiotic supplement, like the manufacturer that I work for, actually use like a coating which protects the live bacteria from the harsh acidity of the stomach acid. So this is actually applied, this coating is applied after the bacteria freeze dried. So it's actually sprayed onto the individual bacteria, and that helps them reach the digestive tract alive. And that's obviously where they need to reproduce, they need to colonize and obviously get to work. So the company I work for as well, they also have lots of clinical trials to show that their probiotics have a significant difference in health after supplementation compared to placebo. And they do have clinical trials to show that they can survive the stomach acid as well. So so that's really, really important. I mean, if you haven't got that kind of evidence, then, it's probably not going to reach the gut alive.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people do worry, don't they? They're like, what probiotics actually get to the gut? And it's negligible sometimes what actually gets through the stomach acid. And then everyone's like, well, what am I supposed to do then? And then, as you're saying, it's very hard to sort of get, fermented foods, cultured foods in, touching your body every day, all the time. So sometimes, having a backup plan, or like, your insurance policy that you are getting them in by having some supplements in forms of probiotics is probably a good idea, really. So when I'm speaking to clients, I'm always encouraging them to rotate the probiotics. And they're kind of like, why? I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to have a good diversity of beneficial microbes in the gut. Like, diversity is key. We need like this diverse ecosystem of different microbes. And typically, you can rotate your probiotic brands and different strains to actually gather that diversity. But some of the probiotics will be quite transient. And another way that you could do it is just by taking a really good quality multi-strain probiotic that can offer you obviously a big diversity of those probiotic strains. And there is research to suggest that in some cases, for certain specific conditions or areas of the body or digestive tract, we actually need specific strains, and that's because some strains will naturally flourish in different areas of the body because the environment's so different. So, for example, the surface of the skin, the environment of the skin is so much different to the environment of the gut. All different in terms of the pH, the amount of oxygen present, or even like the nutrients that are present there as well. I think when you're taking like a multi-strain combination, each different strain kind of naturally thrives in different areas. And if you think of it a bit like a species and the weather, that would make sense. A polar bear wouldn't naturally thrive in the desert, and obviously a lion wouldn't naturally thrive in the Arctic. So they kind of just
like those analogies.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do actually think it's really important, though, to have a really good variety of plant fibres. So to actually mix up your fruit and vegetables is really important. Plant fibres that act as prebiotics. So a prebiotic is something that's actually going to feed the beneficial bacteria, the good bacteria in the gut. And fibre is really great for obviously keeping you fuller for longer, and it helps with weight loss, and but it actually helps to shape our microbiome, because the different strains of bacteria will actually thrive off of plant fibres. And apparently, you should be aiming for at least 30 different types of fruits and vegetables a week. So the more varied your intake of veggies and whole grains and salads, fruits, etc., the more diversity it's going to encourage in your gut.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all up for that. We've got to get the diversity in. I'm always talking about ecosystems.
Yeah,
it's so true. A good ecosystem is lots of animals, lots of species, and that's the same in your gut. And then, with your pre and probiotics, people sort of, what is a pre, what is a pro, and what do I need it for? And I kind of use the analogy, your pre is the soil and your pro is the flower. So without pre, you can't grow your flowers. And then they kind of sort of sticks in the head. So hopefully that sort of works for people. Also, I just wanted to talk a little bit about different IBS problems. Leaky gut is something that's talked about a lot. What exactly is that?
So leaky gut is often referred to as hyperpermeability of the gut lining, and it's where the gut lining becomes permeable, becomes leaky. And it is a common issue for quite a lot of people. So particularly like in this day and age, because there's just so many things that can damage the delicate ecosystem of the microbiome, and also that has a knock-on effect to the gut lining and its health. So lots of things that we're exposed to, for example, antibiotics, which will wipe out the good bacteria. If we're having a really poor diet with not many plant fibres, you might be drinking too much alcohol, and that's going to affect what bacteria grow in the gut. You might be stressed, that has a knock-on effect as well. And even
a lot of people are.
Yeah, I know, it's a really common issue. Even just consuming things like pesticides and herbicides. But yeah, the lining of the gut, I mean, it's really delicate. I mean, it's literally just one cell thick. And that's really surprising when you think that obviously it's a direct route into the body, into the bloodstream. So we want the gut barrier, this epithelial barrier, to have nice tight junctions, so that only digested nutrients can actually be absorbed from the gut into the bloodstream. So I'm talking like digested proteins, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins and minerals. But obviously when this lining of the gut becomes inflamed or damaged, the tight junctions of the gut barrier, so these spaces in between the epithelial cells that line the gut, those spaces become like larger and leaky, and obviously that equals leaky gut, really. So this allows larger particles to actually cross from the gut into the bloodstream, and these larger particles, they shouldn't really be in the bloodstream, they shouldn't be there, and often they're recognized as a foreign body. So often, if you get the crossing of undigested or partially digested proteins, that will increase the risk of people developing food sensitivities, and perhaps like allergies, and also autoimmune diseases. And then obviously if you get things like toxins and pathogens from the gut getting into the bloodstream, that's going to result in infections and widespread inflammation in the body. But yeah, we do actually have about 70% of our immune cells which are located in and around the gut lining. So it's like a military of defense around the gut lining. And, you know, that's really important because they have to be there to be ready to attack any foreign invaders that enter the bloodstream. So yeah, for example, any kind of foreign substances they don't recognize, toxins, pathogens, and partially digested proteins.
Yeah, I mean, I'd kind of say, you know, yeah, it's like it's your first line of defense, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, our like gut is basically an external pipe that's encased by our body. And then, you know, that's how things can get in, other than our skin, which is obviously the other barrier.
Yeah.
You know, they're the two main areas. And as you just said, you know, it's like one cell thick, you know, and that's our protective mechanism on a physical level. And then we need, you know, the good bacteria and everything, as you say, like little soldiers.
Yeah.
You know, that's our little soldiers, our army. Yeah. They're going to stop getting these things in. And you know, obviously, if you get the larger passage, you know, the larger channels opening and stuff with this leaky gut, then you know we are more susceptible to the inflammation, aren't we, in our body? So, what sort of things can then cause leaky gut? Just so people can have a go at sort of maybe getting rid of those things.
Yeah, so leaky gut actually occurs quite well. It's a hallmark of autoimmune diseases which damage the gut lining. So people with inflammatory bowel disease, like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, but also celiac disease. You know, they tend to have leaky gut because celiac disease is characterized by an autoimmune reaction to gluten. So obviously that's protein in wheat, rye, and barley. And these conditions, you know, you have like an over-inflammatory response, and the immune system mistakenly attacks the lining of the gut and the villi of the gut, and then obviously the tight junctions become damaged. But obviously, if we don't have those conditions, a much wider, more common cause of leaky gut is actually down to dysbiosis. And when I say dysbiosis, I mean like an imbalance of gut microbes. So yeah, like if somebody has an unhealthy mixture of gut microbes, we would refer to that as dysbiosis. For example, if they had an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria and a reduced amount of good diversity of good probiotic strains. And there's loads of things that can cause dysbiosis. As I mentioned before, there's just so many things that can damage our gut microbiome. Even if somebody's had something like food poisoning, that will tend to wipe out the good bacteria. Antibiotics again do the same kind of thing. Stress, poor sleep, alcohol, poor diet, and even people that take PPIs as well. This is really interesting.
Lots of people take PPIs.
Yeah, antacids.
So what?
PPIs.
Yeah, the acids. A lot of people don't realise the PPIs. It's like omeprazole, isn't it?
Yeah,
a lot of people are on omeprazole. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we should have this acidity of the stomach acid, and if you're reducing that, then you're going to make it more, well, it's going to be easier for pathogens to actually enter the digestive tract, and also for bacteria to overgrow in the wrong place because of the difference in acidity. So yeah, I don't think it's safe to take PPIs long term. They should only be sort of prescribed for short-term periods. So yeah, but I mean, just going back to obviously, you know, how what causes the leaky gut, and basically how we can sort of like reduce it from happening. We do actually have, you know, those immune cells that on the lining of our gut, and just remember, obviously they're constantly like monitoring the microbes that are actually in the gut, and they want to be kind of patrolling this border of the gut lining to basically respond to any kind of threats of infection. And there are certain immune cells that will actually sample the microbes in the gut. So these are called dendritic cells, and they will basically sample the gut microbes by poking like a long arm in through the tight junctions, and actually taking some of the microbe back to T cells and presenting them. And then T cells, like your memory cells, they're going to say whether it's a friend or foe. But those T cells will then obviously produce either pro or anti-inflammatory chemical messengers called cytokines. around the body to communicate with the other immune cells. So if they're sending like pro-inflammatory signals, cytokines, this is going to activate other T cells, B cells, and macrophages to like come to the gut lining and start attacking these foreign invaders. But actually during that attack battle, it creates quite a lot of damage and inflammation to the gut lining. So particularly when macrophages actually do something called phagocytosis. And if this is happening chronically, because you've got a bad mixture of microbes in the gut, then it's going to create long-term damage, and then you end up getting leaky gut. So that can also be another cause. So
right. So if people are thinking, have I got leaky gut or not, what sort of symptoms would they be seeing?
yeah, so it could be a whole different range of symptoms, but generally you'd probably have sort of bloating, gas, abdominal discomfort. Not everybody does though. You might have leaky gut and not really have any symptoms at all. But obviously only like nutrients and vitamins and minerals are only absorbed through a healthy gut lining. So somebody might have a really good diet, but they might not be absorbing any of those vitamins and minerals. They might end up having deficiencies because they've got leaky gut. It could be as well, one of the most like biggest hallmarks of leaky gut is having quite high inflammation in the body. So as we've mentioned before, obviously when you have this immune response, it creates a release of cytokines, inflammatory cytokines, and then obviously you might have like a high inflammatory marker called CRP. And because of this inflammation, you might actually get achy joints, you might get sore muscles, you might have skin issues like eczema and psoriasis if you're susceptible to those. And it might even be that you're having like brain fog, and if you've got inflammation in the blood and the body, and then obviously it can affect the brain. So you might have symptoms of like anxiety, depression, brain fog, mental confusion, fatigue, headaches, migraines. You might also be more susceptible to things like allergies and food sensitivities and autoimmune diseases as well. So there's a whole load of different sort of
there's loads there, isn't there?
Yeah.
I bet everyone's ticking going, oh yeah, I've got that as well. I've got brain fog. Yeah, I forget where the kids' stuff is. Yeah, I'm just rushing around. So in terms of thinking about probiotics, why would probiotics help with reducing this inflammation and then perhaps help, with their symptoms?
Yeah, so obviously the good bacteria in the gut actually help to prevent pathogens from overgrowing directly because they compete for space and nutrients, a bit like, like bacteria wars really, but also they can create an antibiotic-like substance called bactericins. So this actually acts to like kill the bad bacteria, and also the good microbes, particularly lactobacillus, can actually stimulate the secretion of immunoglobulins, so IgA, which actually acts as another kind of weapon against pathogens as well. So probiotics also colonize in the gut and help to maintain the mucosal layer. So this is like a sticky mucosal layer, which is like another kind of layer of defense really. So before we get to the cells that line the gut, that epithelial barrier, which is just one cell thick, we have this mucosal sticky layer, and the pathogens find it quite hard to adhere to this, and the good bacteria kind of coat it so that it and keep it intact. So that actually prevents the pathogens and toxins from being in direct contact with the cells that line the gut. And this means that they also have less chance of crossing into the bloodstream or being identified, by our immune cells as being a potential threat. So therefore, if you can maintain that mucosal layer, then it can help keep the immune cells on more of an anti-inflammatory sort of calm activation rather than being activated as pro-inflammatory.
Right. Yeah, that's quite a lot to take in.
Yeah, but just remember that obviously if you've got inflammation in the gut, it usually relates to inflammation elsewhere, because these pro-inflammatory cytokines, like for example interleukin-6, and TNF alpha, they can sort of travel anywhere in the body, so they can reach the blood-brain barrier, and that can result in inflammation in the brain.
Okay, yeah. Well, we can see the connection there, can't we? So lots of people watching this will have also heard about candida. So what is it and where does it come from?
Yeah, so Candida is actually, well, the most common sort of form of Candida infection is caused by Candida albicans, and this is really a yeast-like fungi. Actually, around about 40% of us are estimated to carry Candida, and in sort of low numbers, it's really harmless. It's nothing to worry about, but it is an opportunistic pathogen. So it can be difficult to get rid of, and it can cause infections and actually inflammation, particularly in the gut, actually, because it can overgrow and become a more invasive fungus form.
Right. So what symptoms could present themselves with if you have Candida?
So in the gut, you might get kind of bloating and gas, inflammation of the gut lining, leaky gut. But that's when it's kind of trying to tunnel through the tight junctions and actually infiltrate into the bloodstream. But obviously it can overgrow anywhere in the body. So if somebody has an oral thrush infection caused by Candida, they might have symptoms of a thick white coating over their tongue. Yes, that's quite common. And then obviously vaginal thrush is the thick white discharge. Even things like itchy skin rashes, dry skin rashes can sometimes be down to Candida, or in moist areas of the body, and things like athlete's foot, again, that's linked to yeast infection, fungal nails, and also you can get a form of Candida blood poisoning.
Really?
Yeah, so you can get fungemia, which is the presence of yeast or fungus in the bloodstream, but the most common type of this kind of infection is actually down to candemia, which is a yeast infection in the bloodstream. But like I said, we do have immune cells, so hopefully in somebody who's immune sufficient, that you wouldn't really see that. It's usually only in people that are immunocompromised. So
so when their immune system's gone a bit lower than normal, that's what they're opportunists, aren't they, as you said before? So they get up and start cracking on and like multiply like mad, don't they? Sorry, computer just went. Yes. So what are the sort of things that would drive Candida? And as in terms of looking for a probiotic that might help Candida or reduce Candida, what actual strains would someone be looking for in their probiotic to help support this Candida?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Candida is like often quite difficult to get rid of, so it's much easier to prevent the overgrowth, and that's why like we recommend taking probiotics alongside antibiotics, because often people will experience an overgrowth after they've had antibiotics, because it just destroys all the beneficial bacteria, and then obviously the Candida can just go AWOL. But you can also supplement with a yeast probiotic, particularly if you're taking antibiotics, because obviously it's not going to be affected by the antibiotics because it's a yeast. Like Espeladi, for example, is a really good non-pathogenic yeast probiotic, and this is really great for anti-diarrheal. It's also brilliant for a cleanse. It binds with pathogens like Salmonella, but also Candida. So it actually helps to eliminate the Candida from the digestive tract, from the body. So yeah, also you should really, if you're trying to do a Candida cleanse, you should be watching your diet, because Candida will thrive off of refined carbohydrates and sugars, so and alcohol as well. So it's really important.
No Prosecco.
Yeah, no Prosecco.
No Prosecco.
Yeah, so it's really important to try and cut these out when trying to eradicate Candida. But often, you do get people that will suffer with recurrent episodes or recurrent infections because they've got high blood sugar. So diabetics, for example, often have an issue with it. And as I mentioned before, people that are immunocompromised, so if they're taking immunosuppressants or maybe they're clinically ill, they've had cancer treatment. So we do really need to support the immune system with probiotics, and also consider supplementing with those immune supporting vitamins and minerals, things like zinc, vitamin D, etc. as well. But yeah, in terms of the probiotic strains, supplementing with mainly lactobacillus strains is really important, particularly to help rebalance the gut and the vaginal flora. And, you know, if women are suffering with vaginal thrush, that's going to help to replenish the good bacteria. The vaginal flora is really heavily lactobacillus dense.
Oh, great. Good to
Yeah,
know. People have got thrush.
yeah.
They just that suffer in silence, I think.
I know, it's such a sort of like untalked about feminine issue, but obviously, you know, it does happen. It's really, really common. And lactobacillus, because, you know, they increase the acidity of the vaginal flora, that actually directly helps to prevent the candida from overgrowing, because candida will actually thrive again in more alkaline environments. So it's really important to take the probiotics, which are lactic acid producing, to help with increasing the acidity of the vaginal flora and also the gut as well.
Right. Okay. So another we've mentioned candida, we've mentioned thrush. We need to mention cystitis.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about cystitis. Why do we keep getting repetitive episodes of cystitis? And it's not just when we're having a good time. It's like all the time people get it.
Yeah. So basically, if you do have a multi-strain combination, mainly lactobacillus strains, that's going to help with obviously candida, and there's some really good ones for preventing candida. But then when we're looking at cystitis, two of the main sort of pathogens that we know cause cystitis are E. coli and E. faecalis, and these pathogens actually come from the back passage. So if people have an overgrowth of these pathogens in their gut, then they're going to be more prone to getting cystitis infections. So cystitis is urinary tract infections, and often they're reoccurring. So a lot of people will get recurring episodes of urinary tract infections, and it's really uncomfortable, isn't it? You know, you need to pee and you might see blood in your pee, and you need to pee urgently, and it's pretty awful. But yeah, with the research, we found that Lactobacillus acidophilus and Lactobacillus plantarum have significant antimicrobial effects against these pathogens, E. coli and E. faecalis. So I would suggest supplementing with
those strains.
Yeah, with those strains. But then you want to be adding in as well, like cranberry extract. So the cranberry's got a natural phytochemical called proanthocyanidins, and these actually will act to make the sides of the urethra slippery. So when obviously you pass urine, the bacteria naturally gets flushed out when you go to the toilet. So we do recommend drinking lots of fluids as well if you have a cystitis infection. But another thing you can do as well is supplement with vitamin A, because that will help with repairing the mucous membranes which line the urethra. You also have mucous membranes in the gut as well, but the mucous membranes in the urethra can become damaged, and then these can actually it can promote scarring when they're damaged, and if you have repeated infections, and scarring builds up, then this can actually be a vicious cycle, because it increases the likelihood of getting a reinfection again. Yeah, and I think as well, just like with the candida, lots of like natural antifungals in the diet as well that you can get. So things like garlic, grapefruit extract, oregano, cloves, and even things like cropylic acid from coconut. So, adding in these kind of natural antifungals is also a really good thing that I've just thought of for candida as well.
Oh, good. That's good. I was just thinking, so basically with candida or cystitis and stuff, you mentioned like the vitamin A and and all you like cranberry extracts and stuff. Would you say that it would be good if someone's getting repeat episodes? Do they just take it when they've got it, or would they take it all the time as more of a prevention and healing protocol?
Yeah, if you do have, if you are prone to getting repeated episodes of UTIs, then it might be something that you want to take as a maintenance to prevent. So we would just sort of recommend, taking probiotics to prevent an infection. And they're horrible, really, aren't they? Nobody wants to have an infection. There are clinical trials to show that some of the products actually help with preventing recurrent UTIs in women over a 6-month period compared to a placebo, and then that actually reduced the amount of antibiotics that the women had to take as well. So
well, that's always a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, every time you have to take an antibiotic, it's going to have a knock-on effect to your gut microbiome, and then again, it's a vicious cycle. So if you can take as a prevention, that would be a much better option.
Yeah, well, that's really good to know. So moving on to brain health. So I'm obsessed with the gut blood brain axis, and I'm always banging on about it. So I was just wondering how you could maybe explain a bit more about that, in terms of why, if we are inflamed in the gut, or that's not maybe working as well as it could do, why we might then end up suffering with things like brain fog, lack of concentration, headaches, and all that shebang.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the gut and the brain are linked is through the gut-brain axis. So this is a bi-directional communication between the gut and brain, and they're actually joined together through the vagus nerve. So they communicate, and it's a two-way street. But there's actually 3 main ways that they're connected. So that it's not just obviously the nervous system, the vagus nerve, but also through the immune system as well. And through the hormonal endocrine system. So I'll go into a little bit more detail about each of them, starting off with the nervous system. So I mentioned about the vagus nerve. So this is the 10th cranial nerve. It's quite a long nerve. It connects the brain right down to the gut lining, and it's part of the enteric nervous system. But it's also connected.
I'm obsessed with vagus nerve.
I know, it's great. This is so interesting, all of this research that's coming out.
Oh, mega.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, the vagus nerve is also connected to the heart and the lungs, the liver, as well as the gut. And obviously this looks after these automatic functions such as digestion and movement of food as well through our gut. And it's really interesting that actually about 80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve come up from the gut to the brain. So the vagus nerve is actually bringing more signals up from the gut to the brain, and all that information about digestion, and also from the other organs as well, like the liver, heart and lungs. Yeah.
So with the vagus nerve and everything, there's a lot of people, when you say, I'm a bit nervous, I've got like butterflies in my tummy, or gut instinct, or what truth is there in that?
Yeah, so the vagus nerve obviously allows the gut and the brain to communicate and send messages back and forth. So when you're feeling like anxious or nervous and you feel those butterflies, this is actually a really good example of your gut and your brain talking to each other. It's quite an automatic, instinctive process. And often people describe a gut feeling, and this is an instinctive feeling, as your gut is connected also to the amygdala, which is the emotional memory processing part of your brain, and this is the area of your brain where actually we perceive threats. So when you get that fight or flight response, it's the amygdala that first recognizes, oh my god, it's a lion, I need to run. Yeah, so I mean the amygdala will sort of target first, and then it will send a cascade of hormonal signals through the HPA axis. So that's the hypothalamus, the pituitary and the adrenal glands. Basically the adrenal glands will then release cortisol and adrenaline. So these are stress hormones, and this obviously primes the body into a survival mode, that fight or flight response. So you might actually notice that you have digestive issues because non-essential processes actually slow down when you're stressed. So digestion is kind of put on the back burner. And also you'll have an increase in blood glucose as well, because more glucose is released from the liver into the bloodstream to provide us energy to the muscles, to run away if we need to, or fight. And then obviously your heart rate goes up, your breathing increases, and that can make you feel quite anxious as well. So yeah, and that's one way, I guess, which isn't like an automatic process, but then they are connected as well through sort of like hunger hormones and things as well. So yeah,
it's really interesting though, isn't it, how as soon as we're in fight or flight or in a stressed position, things start deviating away from our digestive system. And then that's why if you think about, if I look at clients and they might be really stressed out at work, they never turn off, they can't move into the calmer nervous system. They've never ever heard of the vagus nerve, and that's a great way to physically get into that system. Yeah, and then they start explaining the digestive issues, and I'm like, aha. So can you explain a little bit more about the immune system with the brain?
Yeah. So as I kind of mentioned before, our immune cells, roughly about 70% of them are located in and around the gut lining. And obviously the mixture of microbes, as I mentioned, help to like modulate the immune system and the inflammatory response. So the good microbes will help to downregulate inflammation in the body. And, you know, by probiotics helping with the mucosal layer and keeping the gut barrier intact and maintaining those tight junctions, preventing toxins and pathogens from leaching into circulation. This is going to help prevent that release of pro-inflammatory sort of cytokines and messengers from actually getting released into the blood and then eventually reaching the brain. So, you know, if you do have high inflammatory cytokines in the blood, like TNF alpha, interleukin 6, for example, those are some common ones. I mean, they can sort of travel around the bloodstream and reach what's called the blood-brain barrier. So just like the gut, this barrier, you know, obviously it should be sort of nice and healthy. But if it's inflamed or damaged, that can become hyperpermeable, and this then allows things like toxins to enter the brain. But also, if you've got those inflammatory cytokines, then, you know, potentially they can cross into the brain. And we do have immune cells in our brain called microglia, and obviously the microglia, if they're coming across these pro-inflammatory cytokines, they can be activated as pro-inflammatory, so they can obviously cause inflammation in the brain. And then when you get inflammation in the brain, you might have physical symptoms of anxiety, low mood, depression, mood disorders, brain fog, confusion, fatigue, and headaches. So headaches, yeah, it's a big thing.
Yeah.
Migraines as well.
Migraine, yeah. So I mean, let's talk about migraines.
Yeah. So in migraines, we know that a toxin from the guts is a particular toxin called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS for short. This basically originates from the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria, and it shouldn't be able to get into the bloodstream in large amounts, but obviously if the lining of the gut is damaged and leaky, it can cross into circulation, and then the LPS can travel around the body. It does trigger inflammation in the body, but it can actually travel up to the brainstem through the blood and to the blood-brain barrier as well. So we do have a nerve that goes into our brain in 3 parts called the trigeminal nerve. It starts at the brainstem, and it's actually a major pain pathway in the brain. So the LPS actually can bind with receptors on this nerve, on the trigeminal nerve, and it acts to oversensitize it. And then we think that basically the nerve then releases neuropeptides into the brain, which cause inflammation and the vasodilation of the blood vessels, which is what the migraine is. So if people are susceptible to migraines, and not everybody is, you know, that has a high LPS is going to get migraines, you know, there's a genetic risk, and some people are susceptible to migraines and other people aren't. But we know that this is a major trigger for migraines in people who are susceptible. And actually, you know, there's been trials using multi-strain probiotics over a period of 8 weeks in people who suffer chronically and episodically with migraines. And compared to a placebo, it's found that it's reduced the frequency of the migraines by, you know, almost half, and also the intensity of the migraines as well. And we think it's down to the fact that the probiotics are actually helping with healing the gut, right, and actually preventing the cycle of the lipopolysaccharides from being able to get into the bloodstream and trigger that inflammation, and being able to reach obviously the trigeminal nerve, and obviously that releasing of the neuropeptides from the trigeminal nerve. Another thing as well, it's quite interesting, it might actually be working on serotonin. So we know that actually there are fluctuations in the level of serotonin during different stages of the migraine attack. And so they kind of think that having low serotonin might actually be a trigger for those people that are susceptible to migraines. And really interesting, a lot of people get like menstrual migraines. So
Yeah.
estrogen apparently actually influences serotonin transmission. So this kind of maybe explain, when estrogen's high, serotonin might be low, why women then tend to get migraines during their kind of hormonal cycles, their menstrual cycles.
Right. Yeah, so that'd be why it'd be just in the first few weeks and then maybe change.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's really interesting, and obviously the low serotonin basically is like a trigger for the brain to then kind of splurt out its stores of serotonin. So almost during the actual migraine attack, they can see, that the brain gets flooded with serotonin, and then obviously after the migraine attack, people become quite sort of like like they get the brain fog, the low mood, those kind of symptoms, and that's probably down to the fact that the brain's used up all of its stores of serotonin. But yeah, there is some research to show that probiotics may help with stimulating the serotonin production, and maybe they're working to keep that stable. So we know that short chain fatty acids will help with more of the precursor of serotonin, so tryptophan, to be converted into serotonin rather than something else called kynurenine. So it might be working on that way as well. But if you can have a good amount of magnesium, that's also really beneficial for migraines, and vitamin B6, and both these are actually cofactors for serotonin production, and they also both support the nervous system as well. And also vitamin B6 has like a beneficial effect on helping with hormones as well, helping to balance hormones.
Yeah, that's a great, it is. It's a great combination, isn't it? Trying to think about getting all your cofactors in for the serotonin production. As you said, if you get headaches, you get this massive drop afterwards. So you've got this big flush of serotonin, and then you're left with nothing. And it's a lot. That goes in quite well with a lot of the clients that I see with migraines. They're so low in mood afterwards. And I noticed that it does tend to be with women a lot of the time with the cycles. So a lot of women here, I think I'm estrogen dominant. I've got hormone dysregulation. Can you explain a little bit about why it's so healthy for the gut to be, why it's so good for the gut to be healthy as far as hormone production is concerned?
Yeah, so we were talking about before as well, the gut having the hormonal influence. So estrogen is kind of mainly produced in the ovaries and the adrenal glands, and it's used, in different tissues in the body like the uterus and the breasts. But after it's being used, it's actually sent to the liver to be excreted into the gut, and it's basically in like a deactivated form. It's bound when it's put into the gut with the bile. There's actually different types of bacteria in the gut. So if somebody's got an unhealthy mixture of microbes in their microbiome, I think there's around about 50 different microbes that have been shown to produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. So this enzyme actually works to almost reactivate the estrogen that's been dumped by the liver to actually be excreted. And by reactivating it, it means that instead of it exiting the body in the stools, it's actually reabsorbed back into circulation, and then you get too much estrogen in the body. So then you end up in estrogen dominance.
Right.
So, the studies that are showing that people who have high amounts of this enzyme, that they've got dysbiosis, but they've also got high amounts of estrogen in their body, and that increases the risk of infertility, PMS, endometriosis, breast cancer, and then in men, prostate cancer. So it's really important, obviously, to make sure that your hormones are balanced and you're not in estrogen dominance.
Yeah, you need to look after your liver as well, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm pretty obsessed with liver. Well, you mentioned before about B6. B6 is great for your liver as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and glutathione.
Yeah. Oh, have you seen any of my talks on glutathione? I'm obsessed with it. Like, everyone needs to know about glutathione.
I think everybody should take it. It's great.
Oh, it's funny. Right. So, any other hormones that need to be known about that are made in the gut?
Yeah, so not so much like hormones, but actually neurotransmitters. So just going back
sorry,
to,
I don't know why I said hormones.
yeah, but I mean, we do have like hunger hormones, as I mentioned before, like leptin and ghrelin. But yeah, like neurotransmitters, it's really surprising actually that 90% of our serotonin, which we all think of as the happy hormone, the happy neurotransmitter, is actually made in our gut. So 90% of our body serotonin is in our gut. And in our gut, it's actually really needed to keep us regular. So really funny, again, people that suffer with depression tend to suffer with constipation, because the serotonin is needed for that natural muscle movement to work the food through our gut, called peristalsis. So that peristalsis movement. Yeah, like there is research to suggest that different strains of probiotics, particularly like a multi-strain combination, but also Bifidobacterium infantis can help with producing serotonin, and also Streptococcus strains and Lactobacillus strains as well. And this is like quite a new area of research. It is growing, so this use of what's called psychobiotics. So sort of psychiatrists actually recommending the use of probiotics, supplementation of probiotics to their clients to improve their mental health is actually a big thing.
That's
so
amazing though, isn't it?
emerge, yeah, because we know that obviously the different microbes will help to produce different kinds of neurotransmitters. So again, we do have something called GABA, which is like a really like calming inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it has like anti-anxiety effects. And Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium genres of probiotics can actually synthesize GABA from monosodium glutamate, MSG. It's not to say MSG is healthy, but obviously they naturally do that in the gut with it. And then also we have sort of dopamine, and again, roughly it's estimated about 50% of our dopamine is made in the gut. But dopamine in the brain is needed for those feelings of motivation, the feeling of reward and pleasure, and it's really implicated in and involved in, you know, addiction as well. But in some areas of the brain, dopamine is essential for movement. So there's a part of the brain called the substantia nigra, where dopamine is actually needed for movement. And research is still in its really early stages, but the results are suggesting that a strain of probiotic bacteria called Bacillus subtilis, so supplementing with that can actually help with reducing these alpha-synuclein plaques which build up in Parkinson's disease in that area of the brain, the substantia nigra. So that's really, really exciting. I mean, you know, looking at probiotics to actually help with the healthy aging of the brain and to reduce the risk of Parkinson's disease is a huge thing. And then, you know, we also know that Lactobacillus plantarum will help with producing acetylcholine, which is actually needed for things like learning, memory, and concentration. And there's a huge body of research actually that's coming out at the moment showing that different strains of probiotics can help with our stress response. So that release of cortisol and adrenaline, those stress hormones. So yeah, people who are stressed might find that, you know, their heart rate increases and they might feel anxious, all of those things that we said before. Well, probiotics are showing that they're actually helping to down regulate that stress response, so people are more able to cope with stresses and not have that cortisol release, which is very interesting. So yeah, there's so much research coming out about the microbiome at the moment, and its influence not just on our, you know, on our health of our gut, but also the wider area of the body, our immune system, our immune function, our hormonal function, our mental health. So it's a really hot topic, and it appears that, you know, in all areas of the body, in all areas of health, that the good microbes are actually really beneficial and they're supportive of our health. And it was Hippocrates that said that all disease begins in the gut. So I think there's probably some truth in that.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you've said resonates with me and some of the clients I see. And it's brilliant that you've got so much research to back it up, specific strains helping specific hormones, neurotransmitters, you know, reducing headaches, helping with moods. It's great. And I mean, even like it's on the news now all the time, isn't it, that they've accepted that, you know, gut microbiome has a big part to play in our immune system, which is good. So it's getting a lot more, you know, out in the mainstream, isn't it, that we do need to really concentrate on our gut and get different strains in for specific things. So I mean, that's been great, Amy. You've been very informative. I'm sure people will be listening going, oh my God, I've written so many notes. Need to go home.
I hope I didn't speak too fast.
well, yeah, hopefully. But yeah, there was so much there. It was ridiculous. It was like a whirlwind for the whole body. Absolutely loved it.
The Microbiome 101.
Yeah, I'll title this the Microbiome 101. Yes. Right. Okay. Thanks very much for joining me. I'm very appreciative if you're spending time with us. And I'm going to stay on, everybody. So we'll just say goodbye to Amy. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much for having me. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye. See you later.
I hope everybody really enjoyed that talk. I'm just going to come off and I'm going to talk on another, it'll be on the next film that I'm putting on. Just some brief descriptions of certain probiotics that will be beneficial for certain things, i.e. children's probiotics, a general one for health. If you're suffering from candida, UTIs, if you do have mood swings that you want to try and sort out, low mood, we can talk about that as well. I've got different ones and other ones for migraines. So if you just want to switch over to the next filming, that would be good. And I hope you enjoyed today. Bye.